Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. Today, in honor of Inauguration Day, I'm releasing part one of the Michael Cohen story. When I started to do research for this story, I found it uncomfortably strange how many things I actually have in common with Michael Cohen. We were both born in the New York City area. I was born in Brooklyn, and he was born in Nassau County on Long Island. We're both close to the same age. He's actually only 2 years older than I am. We were both first-generation born Americans whose families survived the Holocaust. We're both lawyers, and professionally, we both represented real estate developers in the New York metropolitan area. So I have known 1,000 Michael Cohens. I came from the same area. I ran in similar business circles. I've met this type of guy a ton of times. What surprises me is how nearly all of the reporting done about the man completely ignores his background, completely ignores the details of his business dealings. None of it. And I did so much research on it. Nobody talks about what motivated Michael Cohen. Now, I think the reason is obvious. I think a lot of the reporters who covered this story didn't actually care about what motivated Michael Cohen. They were far more infatuated with the big fish. They were going after Donald Trump in their articles. So almost every report about Cohen pays short shrift to him and his unique business dealings. And they all just kind of fast forward to the Trump connection. And since that's the dominating factor in all of the Michael Cohen discussions, and since that's probably all you've read, and probably all you know about Michael Cohen, well, you probably don't know why Michael Cohen really went to jail. In the early 1970s, there were only two kinds of people walking the streets of New York City at 2 o'clock in the morning. People who were looking for trouble, and people who were looking for trouble. So Benjamin Levy was probably pretty apprehensive. That's because one of those people just got into his taxicab. If 1960s New York City was Mad Men, then 1970s New York City was Mad Max. Many parts of the city were deserted, buildings were crumbling, and there were vacant lots everywhere. Crime was rampant, and the city streets were polluted with drug dealers and prostitutes. Areas of Manhattan that are now going for millions of dollars were left fallow, and they could have been purchased for pennies on the dollar in the early 1970s. The city was desperate, and there was no one out there to help. Even the President of the United States at the time, Gerald Ford, famously told the city to drop dead. It was plastered all over the headlines of the papers. So when Benjamin Levy pulled his taxi up to the curb on the Upper West Side of New York at 2 o'clock in the morning, he knew there was a good chance that he'd be in for trouble. And it wasn't just his gut feeling that made him concerned. The statistics backed it up as well. Around 3,000 cab drivers were robbed during a recent year. It made sense. They were an easy mark because everybody knew that cab drivers were flush with cash. Remember, these were the days before Venmo. There was a day before Venmo. There wasn't even cellular communication, so there weren't even credit card readers in the cabs. Cash was king, and cab drivers were known to be holding a bunch of it. So in New York City, they were an easy mark. Levy drove along the west side of Manhattan. His for-hire light was illuminated on the top of his cab. A passenger hailed the cab from the curb, and the taxi pulled over. As the passenger jumped into the back seat, Levy would have switched off the light on the roof and asked him, "Where to?" At that time of the morning, that would surely be the extent of the conversation. Just a brief exchange of necessary information, and that's it. For the rest of the ride, Levy surely had one eye on the road and one eye watching his passenger in the rearview mirror. At the time, there was nothing separating the driver from his passenger, plexiglass dividers that we've seen in cabs all the time, they would become commonplace in a couple of years. But at the time 47-year-old Benjamin Levy picked up his fare that morning, he was completely vulnerable. So Levy could glance back and see his passenger's eyes pretty clearly. The problem was, the passenger could see Levy's eyes as well. And if a taxi driver looks back at his fare at 2 o'clock in the morning and he sees that person staring back, the driver knows he's in trouble. If a fare has their stare locked in, they're looking for an opening. They've probably already checked to make sure the taxi is on one of those deserted New York City streets. And now they're stalking their prey. As soon as they see the driver look back on the road, they pounce. They lurch forward, smashing the driver in the head with a wrench. The driver, stunned and reeling with pain from a cracked skull, is in shock. From behind, the passenger continues to pummel the driver, crushing blows on his ears, scratches on his face. They are even in a position to strangle the driver. Did Benjamin Levy resist that night? Probably. He was a seasoned cabbie, driving for over 14 years. He won a Silver Star in World War II, so he was brave. He surely tried to resist. But like most taxi drivers in his situation, he had no chance. The passenger beat Benjamin Levy unconscious. Then he grabbed Levy's cash and took off, stealing away into the night onto a deserted street. A street without witnesses, a street without security cameras, and a person without any real fear of getting caught. And while his assailant would vanish forever in the dark streets of New York City, Benjamin Levy would later be found dead, slumped over in the front seat of his blood-spattered taxi. Have you taken a ride in a taxi in New York City recently? It's a different world now. First of all, the city is much safer than the days when Benjamin Levy was driving a cab. But there's one very pathetic reality that you'll find in a taxi these days. Almost none of the drivers know where they're going. No one knows the city anymore. And that's because they pretty much don't have to. The world of GPS-powered map apps have made it that way. If you were to get into a taxi in New York City today, most times the driver asks you for the address, puts it in his phone, and then just follows the directions. One time I jumped in a cab outside Penn Station, and I had a driver actually hand me his phone and ask me to put the address in myself. My grandfather is probably rolling in his grave. That's because my grandfather was a New York City taxi driver, and he was a New York City taxi driver right around the same time as Benjamin Levy. My grandfather spent his youth running throughout Europe, deftly avoiding or escaping from the many people who were trying to kill Jews during World War II. He eventually met my grandmother, and my mother was born in a displaced persons camp in Germany. She and my grandparents left Europe as refugees and eventually made it to New York. My grandfather was lucky enough to get a job as a carpenter for the City of New York school system, and he worked there for years. After he retired from his job with the city, he decided to become a taxi driver in New York. I remember my grandfather studying for the test to get his hack license. That's what they call the taxi driver license in New York City. This was the late 1970s, the days before cell phones and GPS, so he had to learn all of the streets in New York in order to pass the test. Seems like you don't have to do that anymore. In what is surely a testament to his determination, he passed the test and drove a taxi in New York City for years. It's actually pretty cool. I have a ton of autographs from famous people. He had Mickey Mantle and Billy Martin in his cab at the same time, and they both signed their names for me. I've got Dustin Hoffman, and I've got a lot more. But you can't just decide one day to wake up and start driving a cab in New York City. Even if you get your hack license that authorizes you to drive a taxi, you can't just go out, buy a yellow car, and start shuttling people around the city. No, your vehicle must be authorized to operate as a taxi. The city of New York controls the number of authorized cabs on the street, and they do that by selling taxi licenses. Those taxi licenses are called medallions. They call it a medallion because authorized cabs literally have an actual medallion bolted to the hood of their car. Well, you could imagine something. If the city controls the number of taxis on the roads by limiting the number of medallions it sells, well, it would follow that these medallions could be quite valuable. And in the days before Uber and Lyft, medallions were worth a crap ton. That's probably why Benjamin Levy drove a cab for 14 years, but only owned that cab for the last year of his life. He was probably saving up all that time to buy his own medallion. But my grandfather and Benjamin Levy were probably part of the last generation who could actually afford to save up and buy a medallion. That's because people like Michael Cohen came along. Michael Cohen's childhood could have been fodder for the lead role in a Neil Simon play. A young Jewish boy, the child of immigrants, grows up in New York City and becomes a lawyer. Well, on second thought, maybe not. Most Neil Simon characters, as far as I know, and all of the post-World War II Jewish immigrants I've ever come to know, well, we all come from what I affectionately call peasant stock. I mean, my family members weren't exactly professionals. Michael Cohen's father, however, was a surgeon. So instead of going to public school, Michael Cohen went to private school. But while his family's income might have been higher than most, the rest of his upbringing seems to be pretty stereotypical. Michael Cohen followed the path that a lot of Jewish Americans did in the 1960s. He went to college, he got a professional degree, he pursued some business investments, and Michael Cohen voted Democratic. That's right. The man who would later become a confidant of the Republican president of the United States started by volunteering for Democrat Michael Dukakis's presidential campaign in 1988, and he would even go on to vote for Barack Obama. When Cohen got out of law school in 1992, he started to practice personal injury law in New York. But Michael Cohen was like a lot of young professionals from the New York City area in the 80s and 90s. Michael Cohen was a hustler. To see what I mean, go back and watch the movie Wall Street. Oliver Stone's indictment of the United States financial system features a young Charlie Sheen portraying a newbie trader on Wall Street. His character's name was Bud Fox. Bud Fox was a young stock trader who had aspirations of making it big. He wasn't content at remaining a nobody at the bottom rungs of the ladder for very long. His entire being was devoted to finding a way to the elite level. And he had a plan. Every day, Bud Fox courted a stock trading titan named Gordon Gekko. Michael Douglas played the slick-haired, power suit-wearing Gordon Gekko. He was brash, he was bold, and to Gordon Gekko, business was a war where you take no prisoners. Is that starting to sound like someone to you? In the movie, Bud Fox makes it very clear that he's willing to do whatever he has to do to climb the ranks of the financial world. He even coaxes a lawyer played by James Spader to help him in his not-so-above-the-board stock trading scheme. Spader's character works for a stereotypical 1980s Wall Street law firm in the movie, a huge, distinguished firm that made all of its lawyers very wealthy. The problem was, back then, you needed to be the right kind of person to get a job in one of those firms. They called them white shoe law firms. The term came from the white buck shoes that were commonly worn by the Ivy League graduates from privileged social backgrounds who made up the ranks of those firms. Well, if you were Michael Cohen, the son of a Jewish immigrant in the 1980s, you were pretty much not welcome into those white shoe firms. So Michael Cohen went into the area of law that a lot of his people gravitated towards: personal injury. Now, don't get me wrong. Personal injury law might have been shunned by the elite white shoe law firms, but it's an honorable and potentially lucrative practice. In personal injury law, you can help a lot of people who are suffering, and you can make a really nice living in the process. I remember a few years ago, I interviewed super lawyer F. Lee Bailey. He was known for being one of the most well-known criminal defense lawyers in history. His client list was a who's who of celebrities, politicians, and the wealthy elite. He complained to me, however, that criminal defense work was not a moneymaker. No matter how wealthy your clients might be, he moaned, you still can't make the big bucks in criminal defense. In that line of work, you're restricted to billing by the hour. And sure, you could charge a high hourly fee, but that kind of money pales in comparison to the amount of money you could make in contingency fees from personal injury matters. So I guess it makes sense that someone with big financial aspirations like Michael Cohen would start off his career in personal injury law. But Michael Cohen wouldn't remain a personal injury lawyer. He apparently had bigger goals. And that's because Michael Cohen was a hustler. It started early in his career when he and his parents started an investment company together. Cohen and his parents started a side business investing in taxicab medallions. At the time Benjamin Levy and my grandfather bought their taxi medallions, they cost around $60,000 apiece. They were expensive by 1970s standards, but if a person worked hard for several years, they could eventually buy one of their own. But New York City changed. And as New York City changed, so too did the price of taxicab medallions. As the city cleaned up its streets, tourists started to come back, and the residential population of the city also increased. All of that made the demand for taxis soar, which meant that the price of taxi medallions rose as well. The price moved into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that put them out of reach for most drivers. Since most people can't afford to buy a medallion, if they wanted to drive a cab in New York City, they had to lease one from people who owned them. To a certain extent, it's like buying a house. If you can't afford to buy, you rent. The business of investing in taxi medallions and leasing them to drivers was therefore on the rise. And the Michael Cohens of the world, well, they were licking their chops. The demand from investors like Michael Cohen for taxi medallions was so great that the medallion cost went through the roof. In the 1970s, the cost of a medallion was an expensive but attainable $60,000. But at their peak in 2013, a single taxicab medallion in New York City was trading for nearly $1 million. Well, Michael Cohen, the hustler, he and his parents ultimately bought a fleet worth of taxi medallions in both New York and Chicago. Seems that they made a ton of money. If you were a hustler who started your career in the late 80s and early 90s near Wall Street, you understood where that Charlie Sheen character, Bud Fox, was coming from. As you progressed throughout your professional career, you never forgot the glamour of that movie. You never forgot the money. You never forgot all the expensive trinkets. You did forget the crime. Oh yeah, in that movie, Charlie Sheen's character didn't exactly pursue his business goals in a legitimate manner. So a lot of the future CEOs of America kind of ignored that part of the movie. They pursued the glamour of Wall Street, but kept with business tactics that stayed on the right side of the law. Others, however, took the fictional Bud Fox's approach to business a little too literally. Whichever path you chose, you looked for your Gordon Gekko. That's how some hustlers get to the next level. They identify their gecko, they pursue their gecko, and they find a way to do business with that person. That hopefully takes the hustler to the next level where they can become the Gordon Gekko, and the cycle repeats itself. Michael Cohen was one of those rising moguls. His taxi investments expanded. He partnered up with people who were big names in the medallion business. He even married a woman whose father was in that business. And, as is usually the case with successful people, his business interests diversified. Cohen invested in a casino cruise ship business, medical clinics, medical billing companies, and he owned a piece of a club in Brooklyn. He also dabbled in real estate, buying and selling a bunch of properties. And it was that last business interest that got him within striking distance of his Gordon Gekko. Around the time that my grandfather was driving a cab, his son-in-law, my father, was working for the city of New York. My dad was a low-level professional in the real estate development department, but he did have a front-row seat for an exciting new project. In 1976, the famous Commodore Hotel was being renovated. A gleaming new skyscraper would be constructed right next door to Grand Central Station. The project was covered astutely by the papers, not just because it was next to one of the most famous historical landmarks in the country. It was also because the project was the first solo development effort for a man who inherited a ton of cash and a well-known name in New York City. The renovation of the Commodore Hotel was the first real estate development project for a young Donald Trump. His next major project in New York would be the famous Trump Tower, and that project would shoot him into stardom. Society's opinion about Donald Trump was very different in the 1980s than it is today. If you lived or worked in an area where Donald Trump was developing, you probably dreaded him. Local citizens who lived in the area, local politicians who were from those areas, and journalists who covered those areas all had some pretty strong opinions about Donald Trump. He was a take-no-prisoners kind of businessman, and he seemed to ruffle the feathers of almost everyone he came up against in the real estate development world. But outside of those geographical areas, he was a novelty. He was a brash character that you read about in the newspapers and the society pages. And if you were an aspiring business mogul in the 1980s, you idolized Donald Trump. The man's face was everywhere. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal that stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for 51 weeks. He followed the book up with a board game. He did TV commercials. He did cameos in movies. He splashed his name on buildings and casinos and golf courses. Now, in retrospect, that business empire might have all been slowly rotting on the inside. But you couldn't tell that from the outside looking in the late 80s and early 90s. Before the days when it became apparent that things were starting to crumble, he was seen by many as the epitome of success. And those aspiring corporate moguls, well, they liked what they saw. Every September, residents of the Turtle Bay neighborhood in New York City get angry. It happens every year, and it happens the same time every year, and the anger is intense. The cause of their anger is something that plagues many metropolitan areas, and you probably would be surprised that it makes people so upset. The problem is traffic. But you see, it's not just regular old city traffic that gets these locals upset. Turtle Bay is home to the United Nations. And every September, the residents of Turtle Bay have to contend with UN Week. UN Week is the week that the United Nations General Assembly is in session. And when the UN General Assembly is in session, dignitaries from all over the world descend upon Turtle Bay. For the entire week, traffic is a nightmare. Traffic is at a standstill, roads get closed, tunnel entrances get closed. It's a traffic disaster. One year, I was almost killed walking through the city during UN Week. They closed a one-way street across the entire city so that the President of the United States, who was in town, his limousine needed to cut through Manhattan really quickly. The only problem was they didn't put any markings on the street, so you didn't know that the street was closed. And they also didn't put any markings on the street that would indicate that they switched the traffic direction of a one-way street from east to west so that the president could get out of the city faster. So here I am, walking along, minding my own business, crossing a street. I check for traffic from the direction that traffic normally comes from, and in the process, I almost got nailed by a presidential motorcade screaming down a one-way street in the wrong direction. That's why the residents of Turtle Bay get angry every September. But if the UN General Assembly isn't in session, Turtle Bay is a really desired residential address. The famous Chrysler Building is only a few blocks away, as is the historical landmark built in the late 1920s known as Tudor City. And that's the reason that Donald Trump decided to build a ritzy residential tower in that neighborhood. The impressive Trump World Tower is located directly across the street from United Nations headquarters in Turtle Bay. Trump World Tower is located between 47th and 48th Streets, and because of its unique location at the end of the UN headquarters property, units in the building have spectacular views of the East River. At the time it was built, it was the tallest residential apartment building in the world, and it utilized the newest construction methods. For those reasons, it was a crown jewel in the Trump portfolio. Those are also probably the reasons that Michael Cohen was attracted to the property. In 2001, Cohen diversified his real estate holdings by investing in units developed by Donald Trump, several of which were located in the Trump World Tower. But what's the truth? Did Michael Cohen buy those properties because they were simply good investments? Or did he buy them so that he could get closer to his own personal Gordon Gekko? Maybe it's a little bit of both. When you research Michael Cohen and his connection to Donald Trump, reports confirm that the men met at the time, so they knew one another, probably as a result of all of the units that Cohen had bought in Trump buildings. But there isn't any specific evidence that Cohen pursued Trump. Truth is, you got to look at the circumstantial connections, and then it seems to paint a bit of a picture. Michael Cohen admitted to reading Donald Trump's book. Not once, but twice. And so much of his career seems to be following in Trump's footsteps. Trump had been teasing political office since the late 1980s. He was even registered as a Democrat for some time. Did you know that? Donald Trump was even a registered Democrat for some time. Of course, he eventually ran as a Republican. Michael Cohen started his political life as a Democrat and eventually ran an unsuccessful campaign for New York City Council as a Republican. Donald Trump made millions in real estate. Michael Cohen expanded his business into real estate. Cohen even changed the area of law he practiced to real estate matters. He became a member of a firm's corporate department and co-chair of their distressed debt and claims trading group. So it's at least plausible that just as Bud Fox wanted to bag his Gordon Gekko, Michael Cohen wanted to bag Donald Trump. And in 2006, he'd have an opportunity to do just that. Go and Google the phrase condo association nightmare and look at the results. The stories that you will find are incredible. And anyone who's ever lived in a condo knows exactly what I'm talking about. There isn't enough time in your life to read all of the stories that are going to pop up. And the issues, well, it's across the spectrum. Everything from the smallest noise complaints to threats of jail time over the color of a swing set. Yeah, I actually read an article about that as a fight in a condo association. How do you make a fight with a condo board exponentially worse? Make it a fight among wealthy condo board members. When wealthy people fight about condo board stuff, the cases go on forever. That's because everybody, the developer and the board members, they all have the resources to pay for endless litigation, and they're all pissed about something that they believe justifies a massive lawsuit. The cases go on forever, and they are hairy. Now, I know what you're thinking. From a lawyer's point of view, hey, a wealthy client with a long, drawn-out case that pays a ton of fees, that's awesome. Yeah, sort of. Those cases are like getting a 4 for $10 roast beef deal at Arby's and eating it by yourself. In the beginning, it's great. It's a good deal and it's satisfying. But the further you get on in the process, you want to vomit. I say that as someone who's tried to eat a 4 for $10 deal at Arby's myself. It's the same way with those condo fights. The cases are moneymakers, but they're not good for your sanity. In 2006, Donald Trump was facing a confrontation with the condo board at the Trump World Tower. Cases like that seem to infuriate Donald Trump. If there was a persistent nemesis for Donald Trump throughout his career as a real estate developer, I would say that persistent nemesis would be the public. Trump was able to push around politicians. He could cajole or even ignore journalists. But members of the public who opposed his projects seemed to be a massive thorn in his side. To a certain extent, condo board members are the same ilk. They're an interest group made up of rank-and-file members of society who get together to make Donald Trump's life miserable, from his point of view. For that reason, Donald Trump put a premium on people who could help him control his nemesis. And in the early 2000s, he needed exactly that sort of help. There was a problem brewing at Donald Trump's flagship property. A group of apartment owners had taken control of the condominium board at Trump World Tower, and they were fighting with him about building operations and management. So to resolve this, Trump needed a lawyer. Of course, a successful businessman like Donald Trump had an army of lawyers at his disposal. But this was a different kind of case. This wasn't litigation. This was negotiation. And it was a unique type of negotiation. It was a dispute with a condo board, and that required a special kind of touch. The deal with the condo board needed to be struck in the trenches, not in the courtroom. So Donald Trump needed someone who had the mindset of a real estate developer, not a litigator. Someone who knew how to threaten, twist arms, but then ultimately find a solution expeditiously enough so that the entire effort doesn't cost a fortune in legal fees. I've worked on these kinds of cases throughout my career. Most of them are ultimately settled, but it's a crappy process. The resolution is often a result of anger-tinged negotiations that are characterized by biting accusations and many hurt feelings. When a settlement is finally reached, there's often this uncomfortable sense of resignation because people are forced to accept a deal that no one on either side is particularly happy with. No one leaves pleased and no one declares victory. It basically sucks all around. The entire process is messy, and that's why lawyers and fancy law firms don't normally have the skill set for this kind of fight. The task isn't suited for someone with white shoes. It's a job for someone wearing combat boots. This was Michael Cohen's chance to bag his Gordon Gekko. At the time, Cohen was a lawyer at a law firm, but it seems that he and Trump had maintained communication. That was, no doubt, a result of Cohen's purchasing several of Trump's condo units. It's not clear if Cohen sold his services to Trump for this matter or if Trump approached Cohen. But whatever the case may be, the circumstances brought them together professionally. And Donald Trump brought in Michael Cohen to fix the Trump World Tower condo board mess. It seems like Michael Cohen was built for this type of case. Negotiating with angry lay people in a condo board context requires a unique blend of forcefulness and fearlessness. It requires someone who is willing to get his hands dirty and get the job done. And that's why Donald Trump probably called on Michael Cohen to resolve the matter. Cohen likely wasn't hired for his knowledge of the details in condo association law. It's not even clear if he had any such knowledge at the time. No, Cohen was hired because he brought the hustler mentality to the table. Cohen fought so hard for his client that the matter almost came to blows. According to the New York Times, Cohen orchestrated a coup that culminated in a standoff between his security detail and private guards hired by the disgruntled owners. But in the end, Cohen got the job done. Trump regained control of the board, even though the New York Times reported that details of the dispute's resolution were kept secret because of a confidentiality agreement. But apparently, Mr. Cohen said that his task was masterfully accomplished. Trump, it seems, was impressed. 3 months later, Michael Cohen joined the Trump Organization. Michael Cohen was given the role of special counsel and executive vice president in the Trump Organization. But when you look at that title, the role seems a little curious. It seems that Trump didn't give Michael Cohen a job on his in-house legal team. No, Cohen was special counsel. Why could that be? Why didn't Donald Trump put Cohen on his in-house counsel team? Well, it's not because Trump didn't respect him. Quite the contrary, Donald Trump gave Michael Cohen the role of special counsel because Cohen brought something special to the table. Listen, it's easy to find a lawyer who can fill a role in an in-house legal department. Members of an in-house legal department are dignified, accomplished lawyers, and they're also a dime a dozen. My apologies to all the in-house counsel lawyers in the audience. I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. All of the respected firms in the country contain qualified lawyers who could easily transition into the role of in-house counsel at a corporation, and many do that seamlessly. But Donald Trump recognized that Michael Cohen had a special talent not shared by those other lawyers. In Michael Cohen, Donald Trump found someone who could get into the trenches, who would sling mud, and who would throw the punches. Michael Cohen wouldn't be used for run-of-the-mill in-house counsel matters. Michael Cohen was reserved for the dogfights. Donald Trump found his fixer. Over the next 10 years, Michael Cohen fixed whatever Donald Trump needed to be fixed. Cohen's ferocious approach on behalf of his client earned him the reputation of being Trump's pit bull. Cohen's loyalty was summed up in his response to a question from ABC News. After apparently being asked to define his role with Trump, Cohen explained, "It means that if somebody does something Mr. Trump doesn't like, I do everything in my power to resolve it to Mr. Trump's benefit." He explained quite directly, "If you do something wrong, I'm going to come at you, grab you by the neck, and I'm not going to let you go until I'm finished." Michael Cohen was on the ascent. He had a thriving taxi medallion leasing business, a growing real estate portfolio, and now he was the enforcer for one of the most famous businessmen on the planet. The only thing left was for him to fall. Come back and check the podcast in 10 days. We're going to have the next installment of the Michael Cohen story, the final installment, part 2. We'll talk about the Steele dossier, we'll talk about Stormy Daniels, and we'll talk about the crimes that ultimately sent Michael Cohen to jail. Hey, on that Stormy Daniels thing, I was thinking about doing an entry on Michael Avenatti, the lawyer who represented Stormy Daniels. He's also got a very interesting background and an interesting career. Does anybody want to hear about him? If you do, go to goodlawyersgonebad.com in the Contact Us section and send me a message. The messages there are sent directly to my email. I'd love to hear if you want to hear about the Michael Avenatti story. And while you're there, if you've got any comments about the podcast at all, please feel free to let me know. And if you wouldn't mind, if it's not too much trouble, go to your podcast platform of choice, whether it's Apple, if it's Spotify, if it's iHeartRadio, whatever it is, and go both rate and leave us a comment. It would be fantastic. If you could rate us, it would be very helpful because that will allow us to be able to get noticed better by the various algorithms, and it'll spread the word about the podcast to all kinds of different people. And if you don't mind going ahead and writing a little bit of a review, that would be wonderful as well. Incidentally, I said we're going to have the next episode in 10 days, and that's going to put us back on track for the 1st and 15th of every month. After the Michael Cohen story is over, we've got a case of murder coming up, and then one of political corruption. I'm hoping also to cover some international lawyers who committed some really bad things overseas that are pretty interesting stories. If you've heard of any interesting stories yourself that you think are worthy of this podcast, again, you could go to goodlawyersgonebad.com and you can leave me a message there about the stories that you think would be interesting to hear. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I need extra content. There's a whole lot of lawyers doing bad things every day. So there's plenty of stuff to do, but there's always interesting stories that I haven't heard of that I'd love to hear if you want to let me know about them. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. It was my pleasure to speak with you today. Again, 10 days for the rest of the Michael Cohen story. Enjoy the rest of your day.